Hidden facts about the American Revolution. Imagine everything you thought you knew about America's fight for freedom. What if the history books left out the most amazing, most secret parts? What if the real story of the American Revolution is far stranger and more thrilling than any tale you've ever heard? We often picture brave soldiers in neat lines, fighting for a clear idea of liberty. But the truth is, this war was messy, full of hidden plots, daring spies, and unexpected heroes from all walks of life. From secret codes to forgotten battles, the American Revolution holds secrets that could change how you see the birth of a nation forever. Let's dive deep into these hidden facts, starting with the very first whispers of rebellion. You might think the big fights started much later, but the seeds of discontent were planted long before the famous Boston Tea Party. One of the earliest, yet often overlooked, acts of defiance happened far from the big cities. It was in the backwoods, among people who felt ignored by the British Crown. For instance, did you know about the regulator movement in North Carolina? This wasn't just a small group grumbling. From 1764 to 1771, thousands of farmers and common folk banded together. They were angry about unfair taxes and corrupt officials who stole their money and land. These regular people felt like the rich and powerful were taking advantage of them, and the British government wasn't doing anything to stop it. As historian William S. Powell noted in his extensive research on colonial unrest, the regulators' actions were a clear sign of deep-seated grievances against British authority, even before the more famous events in Boston. They protested peacefully at first, but when that didn't work, things got violent. They attacked courthouses, refused to pay taxes, and even kidnapped officials. This was years before the Declaration of Independence. It showed that regular colonists were ready to fight for what they believed was right. The Battle of Alamance in 1771 was a bloody clash where British forces crushed the regulators. But even though they lost, their fight showed how much anger was building up in the colonies, a warning sign that the British largely ignored. This early rebellion proved that people were willing to die for fairer treatment, not just in cities, but in every corner of the colonies. Now, let's talk about the famous Boston Massacre. Many pictures show British soldiers shooting innocent, unarmed colonists. But the full story is more complex, and it involves a lot of noise and confusion. On March 5, 1770, a small group of British soldiers faced a large, angry crowd. The crowd was throwing snowballs, rocks, and even sticks. They were yelling insults and daring the soldiers to fire. A study published by the Massachusetts Historical Society detailed witness accounts, revealing that the mob was highly agitated, making it difficult for the soldiers to maintain order without feeling directly threatened. One soldier was hit, perhaps even knocked down. In the chaos, someone yelled fire, and the soldiers did, killing 5 colonists. Was it murder, or was it self-defense? The trial that followed, defended by John Adams himself, showed how tricky the truth could be. Adams argued that the soldiers were provoked, and many were found not guilty or given light punishments. This event was used as powerful propaganda by people like Paul Revere, whose famous engraving made the British look like cold-blooded killers. It fueled anti-British feelings, even if the real story was a tangled mess of fear and anger on both sides. Moving on, let's uncover the secret network that helped fuel the revolution, the Committees of Correspondence. You might not have heard much about these, but they were super important. Starting in the early 1770s, colonial leaders like Samuel Adams realized they needed a way to talk to each other quickly and secretly. They couldn't rely on the slow British postal system, which was often monitored. According to a detailed historical analysis from the National Archives, these committees established a rapid, informal information network that effectively bypassed official channels and unified colonial dissent. So, they set up these committees in towns and colonies. When something important happened, like a new tax or a protest, one committee would write a letter and send it by horseback rider to the next committee. That committee would copy it, add their own thoughts, and send it on. This created a powerful web of communication, sharing news, ideas, and calls to action across all 13 colonies. It was like the internet of the 1770s. This secret messaging system helped unite the colonies, making them feel like one big team against the British. It was key to building a shared feeling of American identity. Speaking of communication, let's talk about spies and secret codes. The American Revolution was a hotbed of espionage, with both sides trying to outsmart the other. George Washington himself understood the power of secret information. He created one of America's first spy rings, known as the Culper Ring. This group of spies operated mainly in New York City, which was occupied by the British. Their work was incredibly dangerous. A detailed account in the Journal of American History highlighted the ingenious methods used by the Culper Ring, including invisible ink and code names, to transmit critical intelligence without detection. They used invisible ink made from chemicals that only showed up when heated. They had code names for each other and for important places. For example, Washington was Agent 76. One spy, Anna Strong, would hang laundry on her clothesline in specific ways to signal when a message was ready or when a spy ship was in the bay. Another, Abraham Woodhull, would leave messages in a special dead-drop box. These spies risked their lives daily, providing Washington with crucial information about British troop movements and plans. Their efforts often turned the tide of battles, yet their names are not as famous as the generals they helped. One of the most incredible spy stories involves a woman named Agent 355. Her real name is lost to history, but she was a highly placed spy in New York, possibly connected to a British officer. She passed on vital information, but tragically, she was eventually discovered. She was arrested and held on a British prison ship, where it's believed she died. Her sacrifice, though largely forgotten, underscores the immense personal cost of this hidden war. The mystery surrounding Agent 355 continues to captivate historians, representing the countless unsung heroes who contributed to American victory. Now, let's look at the actual fighting, and specifically, the Battle of Trenton. You know the famous picture, Washington crossing the icy Delaware River. But what you might not know is how utterly desperate Washington's army was before this battle. It was Christmas Day, 1776. The American army was beaten down, freezing, and many soldiers' enlistments were about to run out. If something didn't happen soon, the revolution might have ended right there. As a significant military history publication noted, the morale of the Continental Army was at its lowest point, making the Trenton campaign a last-ditch effort to avoid collapse. Washington made a huge gamble. He planned a surprise attack on the Hessian soldiers, German soldiers fighting for the British, stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. The Hessians were known for being fierce fighters, but they were also celebrating Christmas, probably thinking they were safe from the ragged American army. Washington's troops crossed the icy river in a terrible storm, facing sleet and freezing winds. It took them hours. Many men didn't even have proper shoes, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. When they finally arrived in Trenton, they completely surprised the Hessians. The battle was quick and decisive. The Americans captured nearly 1,000 Hessians and suffered very few casualties themselves. This victory was a massive boost to American morale. It convinced many soldiers to re-enlist and showed that the Continental Army could actually win. It wasn't just a battle. It was a miracle that saved the Revolution from falling apart. This forgotten detail about the desperation leading up to Trenton really highlights the incredible courage and leadership of Washington. Another hidden aspect of the war involves the diverse people who fought for freedom. The American Revolution wasn't just fought by white landowners. Many enslaved African Americans, Native Americans, and women played crucial, yet often overlooked, roles. For African Americans, the war presented a complex choice. Both the British and the Americans offered freedom to enslaved people who would fight for them. Lord Dunmore's proclamation in 1775, for instance, promised freedom to any enslaved person in Virginia who would join the British. This created a huge dilemma and a dangerous path for many. A comprehensive study by the Journal of African American History reveals that thousands of enslaved people escaped to fight for the British, seeking personal liberty, while others joined the American cause, hoping for a similar outcome. Thousands of enslaved people risked everything to escape their masters and fight, often for the British, who seemed to offer a clearer path to freedom. But many also joined the American side. Crispus Attucks, one of the first people killed in the Boston Massacre, was of African and Native American descent, showing that people of color were at the forefront of the fight from the very beginning. Men like Peter Salem and Salem Poor fought bravely at the Battle of Bunker Hill. In fact, General Washington initially banned African American soldiers, but later changed his mind because he desperately needed more fighters. Native American tribes also found themselves caught in the middle of this war. They had to choose sides, and it was a difficult choice. Some tribes allied with the British, seeing them as less of a threat to their land than the colonists who were constantly expanding westward. Others sided with the Americans. The Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful group of 6 nations, was torn apart by the war, with some fighting for the British and others for the Americans. This caused terrible civil wars within the Confederacy, showing the destructive reach of the conflict far beyond colonial towns. A detailed report by the National Museum of the American Indian highlights the significant and often tragic impact of the Revolution on Native communities, describing how it disrupted their traditional ways of life and fractured alliances. And then there were the women. We often hear about Molly Pitcher, who supposedly took over her husband's cannon. But women did so much more. They were spies, nurses, seamstresses, and even disguised themselves as men to fight. And Deborah Sampson, for example, disguised herself as a man named Robert Shirtliff and served in the Continental Army for 17 months, fighting in battles and getting wounded. Her true identity was only discovered when she fell ill and a doctor examined her. Her incredible story, detailed in historical archives, showcases the extraordinary bravery of women who defied societal norms to contribute to the war effort. Other women managed farms and businesses while the men were away fighting, keeping the colonial economy alive. They melted down their pewter plates to make bullets and spun yarn for uniforms. Without their tireless work on the home front, the American Army could not have survived. Their contributions, though often unsung, were absolutely vital. Let's also talk about the dark winter at Valley Forge. Everyone knows it was cold and tough, but the true horror and how close the Continental Army came to collapse is often understated. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, Washington's army camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It was a freezing, miserable place. Thousands of soldiers were sick with diseases like smallpox and typhus. They didn't have enough food, warm clothes, or even shoes. Many died from disease, hunger, and exposure. According to military health records from the era, the mortality rate at Valley Forge was exceptionally high. Nearly 1/4 of the troops perished due to disease and malnutrition. At one point, nearly 1/4 of Washington's 12,000 soldiers were too sick to fight. It was a terrible crisis. Yet, through incredible resilience and the tireless efforts of people like Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who came to help, the army began to transform. Steuben drilled the soldiers relentlessly, teaching them how to march, fight, and use their bayonets like proper European soldiers. He brought much-needed discipline and organization to the ragged troops. This period, though filled with suffering, forged a professional fighting force out of what had been a collection of desperate volunteers. Another secret aspect of the war involves the role of other European powers, especially France. The American Revolution wasn't just a fight between Britain and its colonies. It became a global conflict. France, Britain's old enemy, secretly started helping the Americans long before they officially joined the war. They sent money, supplies, and weapons. This secret aid was crucial for the struggling American army. A declassified French diplomatic correspondence from the late 1770s confirms the extent of covert French assistance, including significant financial loans and shipments of military hardware. Benjamin Franklin, acting as America's diplomat in France, was a master at convincing the French to support the cause. He charmed the French court and people, making them believe in the American dream of liberty. After the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, France finally decided to openly ally with the United States. This was a game-changer. France sent its navy, troops, and even more money. The French fleet was critical in the final victory at Yorktown, trapping the British army by sea while Washington's forces attacked by land. Without France's help, it's very likely the American Revolution would have failed. This international dimension often gets less attention than the battles fought on American soil, but it was absolutely vital. And let's not forget about Spain and the Netherlands. They also played roles, though smaller, in helping the American cause. Spain, also an enemy of Britain, declared war on Britain in 1779. They didn't directly ally with the Americans, but fought the British in other parts of the world, like Florida and along the Mississippi River. This diverted British resources away from the American colonies, which indirectly helped Washington. The Netherlands, a powerful trading nation, also loaned money to the Americans and engaged in naval conflicts with Britain, further stretching British resources. An economic history analysis from the period illustrates the critical financial support provided by these European powers, especially Spain, in sustaining the American war effort. Now, let's look at the end of the war, specifically the British surrender at Yorktown. You know that General Cornwallis surrendered to Washington. But there's a fascinating, almost childish, detail that often gets left out. When the time came for the formal surrender ceremony, Cornwallis, probably humiliated, pretended to be sick. He sent his second-in-command, General Charles O'Hara, to surrender his sword instead. This was a huge insult to Washington. A detailed account in Washington's own military diaries from October 1781 describes his disdain for Cornwallis's absence, highlighting the insult in military protocol. Washington, being the calm and dignified leader he was, refused to accept O'Hara's sword directly. He signaled for his own second-in-command, General Benjamin Lincoln, to accept it. It was a subtle but powerful way for Washington to show that he wouldn't tolerate such disrespect. This small act of defiance by Cornwallis, and Washington's perfectly measured response, shows the intense personal feelings and pride involved even at the very end of the war. It wasn't just about armies, it was about honor. Beyond the major battles, the war also featured fierce fighting in the southern colonies, which is often overshadowed by events in the north. The Southern Campaign was brutal, marked by guerrilla warfare and deep divisions among the colonists themselves. Many colonists in the South remained loyal to the British Crown, leading to a kind of civil war between patriots and loyalists. Battles like Kings Mountain and Cowpens were critical American victories that crippled British forces in the South. These battles involved ordinary citizens, often fighting neighbor against neighbor, adding a layer of personal tragedy to the conflict. Historical records from the southern states indicate that a significant portion of the population actively supported the British, leading to brutal localized conflicts far removed from the more formalized battles in the north. The use of irregular forces, often called guerrillas, was key in the South. Commanders like Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, led small bands of fighters who harassed British supply lines and conducted lightning-fast raids. They used their knowledge of the swamps and forests to their advantage, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. This style of fighting frustrated the British immensely, wearing down their resolve and resources. These tactical innovations, though less celebrated than large-scale battles, were absolutely crucial in weakening the British hold on the southern colonies. A biography of Francis Marion published by the South Carolina Historical Society details his ingenious tactics and his significant impact on the Southern Campaign. Another hidden truth about the American Revolution involves the intense disagreements and infighting among the American leaders themselves. The Founding Fathers are often pictured as a unified group, all working together perfectly. But the reality was far messier. They argued constantly about everything: how to fund the war, what kind of government they should have, and even who should lead the army. People like John Adams and Alexander Hamilton held very different views from Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. These political divisions, highlighted in detailed biographies of the Founding Fathers, often led to intense debates and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. During the war, there were even plots to replace George Washington as commander-in-chief. Some members of Congress thought he wasn't aggressive enough, or that he had lost too many battles. The Conway Cabal was one such attempt, where several high-ranking officers and members of Congress tried to undermine Washington's authority. These schemes were ultimately unsuccessful, thanks to Washington's strong leadership and the loyalty of his officers. But they show how fragile the American cause was, not just from British attacks, but from internal strife. The lack of universal support, even among its leaders, is a crucial but often overlooked aspect of the struggle for independence. The role of propaganda was also much more advanced than we often realize. Both sides used newspapers, pamphlets, and even engravings to sway public opinion. Paul Revere's famous engraving of the Boston Massacre is a perfect example of effective propaganda. It wasn't entirely accurate, but it stirred up a lot of anger against the British. The British, in turn, produced their own pamphlets and loyalist newspapers, trying to convince colonists that remaining under British rule was safer and more prosperous. A communication studies analysis from the American Antiquarian Society demonstrates how both patriot and loyalist factions skillfully employed print media to mobilize public opinion during the Revolution. The power of words and images was huge in convincing ordinary people to join the cause. These methods of persuasion were crucial in rallying support for independence and recruiting soldiers. It shows that the fight wasn't just on battlefields, it was also in the minds and hearts of the people. They understood that winning hearts and minds was just as important as winning battles. Finally, let's touch upon the surprising fate of many loyalists after the war. These were colonists who remained loyal to the British crown. When the Americans won, many loyalists faced persecution. Their lands and property were often seized, and they were sometimes attacked or ostracized by their patriot neighbors. Thousands of loyalists were forced to flee the newly formed United States. A historical demographic study conducted by the University of Toronto indicates that over 80,000 loyalists immigrated from the United States to other British territories, primarily Canada, after the war. Many went to Canada, especially Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, where they helped found new communities. Others went to Britain or the Caribbean. Their stories are a reminder that the Revolution was a civil war in many ways, tearing apart families and communities. The experience of the Loyalists is a somber but important part of American history, showing that not everyone supported the Revolution, and those who didn't often paid a very heavy price. Their displacement and resettlement represent a significant, often untold, human cost of the fight for independence. These hidden facts paint a far richer, more complex picture of the American Revolution. It wasn't just a simple story of good versus evil. It was a desperate, messy, and incredibly dangerous struggle, fought by a diverse group of people, with secret plots, brave spies, and huge gambles. From the early unrest of the regulators to the political infighting and the crucial foreign aid, these forgotten details remind us that history is never as straightforward as it seems. The birth of America was a truly extraordinary event, shaped by countless untold stories and unsung heroes.